Check out FlipsideGaming.com for all your gaming needs. Use the promo code HEROES to save 10% on all orders over $10 and support the channel at the same time. Hey there, this is John from Heroes and Legends, and welcome to part 4 of our 5-part Guilds of Ravnica limited set review. Today we're going to focus on the Izzet Guild. We'll be looking at every card that is red that does not have a watermark, and then we'll look at all of the Izzet cards in the set. This series is to help you get some insight on the cards before you leap into your first draft or sealed game. Maybe you're planning on going to the pre-release next weekend, and if you're considering making Izzet your guild of choice, you'll definitely want to watch this video. Quickly before we get started though, just a fast reminder, if you check out the description below, you'll find a few ways to help support what we do here. Our Patreon page is down there. You're also going to find links to products on Amazon. Any purchases you make once you go through that link, no matter what it is, we'll get a small percentage. Finally, Flipside Gaming still offering a promo code for our viewers. Hopefully you can save some cash while you support the channel. And as always, thank you not only to the folks that look at those links, but to all the viewers. Y'all make the channel what it is today. So thank you. And let's get into it. We're going to begin with a Mythic right off the bat. Starting off large with Arclight Phoenix. And we talked about this card when it was previewed. It wasn't a card that was very thrilling for standard, but is it good and limited? Yeah, it's actually pretty amazing. So look at it this way. Izzet Guild, they want to have a lot of instants and sorceries. If you go all in on that plan, especially if you're drafting, then yeah, at times you might have the opportunity to bring this back from your graveyard to play, especially with Jumpstart. It could happen. If it happened once, wonderful. There's value there. But I'm still playing this card regardless, even if I don't have that many instants or sorceries, because it's a 3/2 flyer with haste for 4. That is pretty punishing and limited. If you play this in sealed or draft, it's going to do some work for you. Sure, it is a little fragile with the 2 toughness, but it can get in there and fight right away. It's going to feel more like a 3-drop than a 4-drop with a haste. It's got the evasion. It's really good for Boros because Boros wants to keep going, keep attacking under any circumstances. We talked about that a few days ago. It's also obviously good with Izzet strategies because of the clause that it could come back if you can cast enough instants or sorceries in one turn. So not easy to do, but who cares? A 3/2 flyer for 4 with haste? I'm on board. Book Devourer. Sometimes you just need a beefy creature, especially in sealed. So a 4/5 for 6 with trample isn't the worst thing in the world. There's times where that will be an okay curve filler. There's other times where you'll have better higher end curve stuff and you'll skip this. Now, the actual ability on this one's kind of interesting. When it deals combat damage to a player, you may discard all the cards in your hand if you do draw that many cards. It's a may, you don't have to do it, so if it's going to hurt you, I mean, obviously don't do it. But every once in a while, if a game goes long, that could come in handy. Now, the only thing that's awkward about that, though, is if you don't have a way to pump this or something, a 4/5 with trample is going to have a harder time getting their damage across later in a limited game as things get gummed up. And that's probably when you would want to use that ability. You kind of go through all your cards and you hang on to cards that aren't helpful, maybe some lands or something like that. It would be nice if you can get the damage across and recycle your hands. That would be fantastic. I think it's going to be hard to pull off a lot of the time, though, unless you were going to win anyway and the board was clear. If the path's clear, you're just going to win faster, most likely. But it's still an okay curve filler. It might not always make your cut, though. Command the Storm. Now, this is an instant speed removal spell. It only targets creatures. It does cost 5, but 5 damage to target creature is going to take care of most problems that you're going to come across. It's a fantastic removal spell for limited purposes. Relatively high common pick, as a matter of fact, in a draft pack. You're always going to be looking for removal. It's one of the key pillars of your limited decks. So you're going to be happy to play these type of cards most of the time. Now, it also fits into, obviously, the Izzet strategy of having instants and sorceries, and there could be some payoffs with some other cards, which we'll be getting to later. Or also, too, with Boros, for example, they don't want to stop attacking for anything. So if they put a big creature in your way, you can blow it up and just keep going. But regardless of what your strategy is, this is very splashable, and I could see playing this in many builds. Cosmotronic Wave. Okay, that first part of the card is pretty good. Like doing 1 damage to all your opponent's things is not bad, especially if they have a lot of 1 toughness creatures. You might see that in Golgari builds or Selesnya builds especially. However, what's really impressive to me about this card is that last part. Creatures your opponents control can't block this turn. Forecasting cost sorcery, it's very splashable. I want to play this in Boros, though, more than anything, because Boros just can't take the turn off. The second you start taking turns off with Boros and not attacking, you're in trouble. This keeps that chain alive, keeps the Mentor activating, and eventually this could even be a game-ending card. If you're in a board stall and you just need to force your damage across at the end of the game, this could help you do it. You always want to make sure you have at least 1 card in your deck that is going to push past a board stall. This is a very good choice. Great for any deck that has a fair amount of creatures, obviously. It's going to be awesome for you in sealed, definitely. And because it's a sorcery, it does come into play with Izzet strategies as well. Overall, a very good common. You don't have to prioritize this, like pick 1, 2, or 3 in a draft. Maybe pick it up in the middle to later portion of the pack. Just one of these will do. Electrostatic Field. This is a great way to gum up the board for just 2 mana, 0/4 wall, just standing in your opponent's way. It's going to be great against the more aggressive builds like Boros, but really good against a lot of creature strategies, especially if you're on the Izzet plan and things are going to move a little bit slower, a little more methodical. You're going to be building up to some big turns with your instants and sorceries and maybe some of your creatures that grow with those instants and sorceries. So you need some space to breathe. This is going to give you that space to breathe. Very good uncommon. In fact, I would see myself picking this up maybe in the middle of a draft pack, being real happy with it, definitely playing it. Now, the fact that it also can do damage to the opponent is nice. It's not necessarily why I'm picking it up, but especially if I do have a lot of instants and sorceries, maybe I'm all in on that Izzet plan in a draft, you're going to appreciate that extra damage that occurs over time, because I do think you'll have some tight games with Izzet at times. Erratic Cyclops. This is a rare, you won't see it all the time, but this is a nice card to have with Izzet strategies, especially in draft when you're all in on that plan. You're going to want a few creatures that can really push damage across and interact well with instants and sorceries. This is a good one if you can get your hands on it. 0/8 for 4, it's going to gum up the ground and slow things down a little bit. There's nothing wrong with that. And then that ability to have trample and be able to pump the power, even if it is only till end of turn, you'll appreciate that when you have one of those big turns. Between the jumpstart spells that you'll have and maybe an expensive instant or sorcery every once in a while, this could push across some serious damage from time to time. Definitely worth playing, especially in conjunction with cards that maybe could go to the face or keep the board clear. Experimental Frenzy. This rare is a little underwhelming for limited. Obviously, it's one of those cards that you want to build around when it comes to trying to build a constructed deck or maybe try to do something fancy in Commander. But today we're talking about limited, and it's not really that good there. Forecasting cost enchantment that does nothing really on its own. Then you can look at the top card of your deck and you can play that card, but the problem is you can't play the cards in your hand. So it closes off your hand. Now, if a red deck was hyper efficient and was able to dump their hand and then play this and they got access to their top card a little bit early or something like that, that could get interesting, because then you could just chain cards off the top of your deck if you had a bunch of like lightning bolts or something like that, shocks and lightning strikes, that type of thing. It gets kind of interesting, but you don't really have that situation here. So most of the time, in fact, 99.9% of the time, I think you skip this one. Now, you can destroy it for 4 if it's in the way and you need to get access to your hand again. I don't know. That's interesting. But again, it just doesn't really fit into the style of play that you see in Limited. Fearless Halberdier. This is a 3/2 for 3 vanilla. No abilities attached to it. And it's going to trade for 2 drops very, very frequently. Not a big fan of that. Don't like the economy. With that being said, sometimes in Sealed or Draft, you need a 3-drop, even if it's just a 3/2 vanilla for 3. Sure, you're going to be in those situations, especially sealed sometimes. The 3 spot of your curve is vital. You need to make sure there's enough creatures there, enough board presence. So something like this could fulfill that need, but you're not going to be super excited to play it. It might be a little bit better in Boros builds, because if you have some higher power mentor creatures, maybe it attacks in as a 4/3. That's actually not bad at all. But many times I would even rather play a weaker mentor creature over this, just because Mentor is so vital to the strategy of the Boros Guild. Fire Urchin. This is a good 2-drop. Much like I was saying about the previous card where the 3 spot is really important, well, the 2 spot in your curve is even more important. You need to make sure you have board presence there. This is a nice card that will gum up the ground a little bit if you're on the Izzet plan, slow things down. But it's also not a bad Boros card, because if it can attack in with some Mentor creatures having 1 power, there's a good chance it will get a pump to 2/4. 2/4 is pretty durable, has trample to boot, and maybe you can cast a combat trick on it and have a big turn. That could be pretty interesting, actually. Not a bad 2-drop at all. A lot of upside here. The ability itself sometimes will be underwhelming in the later portion of the game. Like, you won't have those huge moments like you might think you would. Because think of it this way. If I play 1 instant or sorcery, now it's a 2/3. If I get a second one out, or maybe I jumpstart and play the same one again, now I got a 3/3 trample. That's not super exciting unless maybe those instants or sorceries are pumping this. That's where it gets better. So it might not be for every build, but I think more often than not you end up playing this. Goblin Crater Maker. 2/2 for 2 with plenty of upside. You know I'm going to love this card. Very high pick draft card for me. As a matter of fact, sometimes first pickable in a lot of packs. Keeps you open on colors, which is nice. Fulfills that critical portion of your curve. And it does more than just attack in as a 2/2. Pay 1, sacrifice it. It can deal 2 damage to target creature or destroy target colorless non-land permanent. Now, honestly, that second ability there, It might not come in handy all that often in this environment. Once in a while it could, but it doesn't matter because you're going to main deck this anyway, and if it comes up, it comes up. But most likely, at some point, you're going to blow this thing up to do 2 damage to target creature, which is great to either keep pushing across damage like Boros wants to do, or protect yourself maybe against a high power, low toughness creature. There's a lot of them in this set, especially if the opponent's playing Izzet or something like that. This will be awesome for you no matter what build. Goblin Locksmith. This one's an okay curve filler if you need it. A 2-1 for 2 is a little more fragile and not as exciting as the card we just saw, obviously, but this one is a common. Now, most of the time, if everything's going well in my pool and I don't need it as a curve filler, then what I'll do is just sideboard it in against an opponent playing some defender creatures. If I see a defender in the first game, then I'll bring it in. Especially against Boros, a defender could be backbreaking if they drop it early, so this is going to help you get around that. Not necessarily a card I would main deck if I could help it, but many times you will be glad you have it. Hellkite Whelp. 5 casting cost, 3/3 flyer? You had me right there. I don't even have to read anymore. This will be great for you in limited. Big creature with evasion to push across damage, and it has a reasonable casting cost, which is also splashable, which is nice. So you can put this really in any build if you can swing that red. Now, also when it attacks, it deals 1 damage to target creature defending player controls. That might be important. It might not be important. Probably better against Golgari or Selesnya some of the time, but you know what I do like about it? It's another way to try to keep the damage going when it comes to Boros. Doing 1 point of damage does change the combat math when you're attacking in. Could be just good enough to keep pressing forward with those mentor creatures. So it's going to be great there, but this will be good in any build. Inescapable Blaze. Instant speed removal spell, but this one's got some versatility. First, it can't be countered. That's always a nice thing. But 6 damage to any target. So you can nail a Planeswalker, you can nail a creature, you can go to your opponent's face. I love the flexibility. You're paying for it here, though. 2 red and 4. It's going to be a harder splash. But this is going to be great anytime your deck can swing the casting cost. You're going to be happy to play this. Another high pick on common, maybe even first pickable in certain packs. And aside from that, it plays well into the Izzet strategy of having good instants and sorceries and being able to chain some of them at times. And with Boros, it can either keep the ground clear later into the game, which could be vital, or if you got your opponent down to 6 or less and you can't finish them off because you stalled out, just go to their face. Lava Coil, another fantastic removal spell here. It's sorcery speed, it's not an instant, so it's a little slower, but it only costs 2, and it's very splashable, just a red and 1, 4 damage to any creature. And it's nice that if it does kill something, it will be exiled instead of going to the graveyard, because there are some graveyard shenanigans going on in this particular set, so it's never a bad thing. For 2 mana, tons of value here. Play it. I don't care what build you're in, just play it. And like I said, if you can figure out the splash, go for it. Maniacal Rage. This is a good reprint, actually. 2 casting costs, lots of economy, lots of flexibility. You could play this one of 2 ways. One example, you put it on one of your own creatures. Maybe you have a trample creature. Maybe you have a mentor creature that you would like to increase the mentor capacity and give something else a +1/+1 counter on your attack. That could be very good, especially in the Boros build. I could see myself really wanting this. So if you do that, just make sure you pick your spots. You want to play that on your creature maybe right before you attack when your opponent's tapped out or they don't have any cards in their hands. You want to get value, at least 2 mana's worth of value, which isn't a whole lot, but you want something to happen. You just don't want to get 2 for 1. So perhaps you get a little more damage across. I think that's worth the 2 mana. Maybe you got a +1/+1 counter on another creature because of the extended mentor reach. I think that's worth the 2 mana. Maybe you trade with something. I think that's worth it. So as long as you feel like the economy's there, play it, but just be careful when you play it. Now, the other way to look at this is you put it on an opponent's creature, and that creature then can't block. Now, they could crack back at you with a larger creature, so do the math there, obviously. But there's going to be many times, especially in Boros, where you might be racing and you need to push the damage across. I've said this a lot this week, but Boros can't stop. They got to keep going. So if this is going to allow you to keep going, it's another way to look at this card. So for 2 mana, lots of versatility. It's going to be great. Definitely in Boros. I would consider playing it, though, most likely in any build, even Izzet. Izzet might be a little more instant sorcery focused, but they also are going to have some larger creatures that sometimes will have evasion like flying, but those might be some of the main ways they get their damage across, and you don't want anything to stop that. So playing this on an opponent's flyer might be really good for you in that example. So very playable card. Ornery Goblin. This is pretty good for Boros builds. Like we said the other day about Boros, if you have the option of playing a mentor creature, even if it's a little weaker than the other creature that you're thinking of playing, but maybe they cost the same, I would go with the mentor creature over the creature that doesn't have mentor, because you just need to keep chaining that ability. It's critical. But if you don't have another creature that has Mentor and you need another 2-drop, I think this is a good one because it's complemented well by Mentor. So this attacks in as a 2/1. If the opponent has to block it though, then it can actually take out a 3 toughness creature. It will trade up a lot of the time when you look at it that way. I like that economy. And if it does go in with a Mentor creature with 3 power or higher, now you're attacking it as a 3/2, and if it's blocked, it can take out a 4 toughness creature. Starts to make combat difficult for the opponent and blocking difficult. So because of that reason alone, I actually really like this card in that particular scenario. Other decks that aren't as aggressive, I'm going to try to skip it, again, unless I really need a 2-drop. This might not be bad in Izzet either, just because it is also a good blocker. A 2/1 that effectively blocks like a 3/1 for 2 mana can slow down the game. Rubblebelt Boar, a 3/3 for 4. Those are decent limited stats, like right on par where you want to be. When it enters the battlefield, target creature gets +2/+0. Makes sense for Boros. It could enhance a Mentor creature or just push more damage across. Makes sense in Izzet too. Maybe you have a flyer that's doing a lot of your damage in that scenario, then this will buff it a little bit. You might have better things at the 4 spot, but it's very playable. Runaway Steamkin. This is actually a good card. It's a rare, you won't see a ton of it, but what I like about it is it's good early, it's good late. Early on, maybe I play it on turn 2. It's a 1/1, little fragile. I usually don't like that, but whenever you cast a red spell, it will get a +1/+1 counter. Now, it can do that 3 times and then it won't happen anymore. But notice it says red spell, not instant or sorcery. So you can play a creature, it's going to get bigger. So I do like the ability here because if I play this early enough, having a 4/4 could be quite substantial. Now later in the game that might not be relevant, but I can do something different with this card. I can remove 3 +1/+1 counters to get 3 red mana, and that could be relevant to ramp into maybe another big bomb or something. Very versatile rare here, I'd be happy to play it. Smelt Ward Minotaur. Alright, now this is a 3-drop I can get behind. 2/3 for 3, a little more durable, and it has an ability. And the ability is very relevant for the guilds that are running red in this particular set. Instants and sorceries trigger it, so Izzet will have more opportunities to do that. Boros, they want to keep attacking at all costs, so if you can make one of your opponent's creatures not be able to block until end of turn, that could be really good to keep the damage coming. Now maybe you play a burn spell and take out one of the creatures your opponent controls, another one can't block that turn. Great way to just keep your momentum if you're trying to be aggressive. This could be a higher draft pick for me, considering it's uncommon. I might not pick it up in the first couple picks of a pack, but definitely by the middle of the pack, if I can grab something like this, I would be happy to. Street Riot. I'm usually not a big fan of these enchantments that don't necessarily do anything on their own. In this case, you need to have other creatures and have good lines of attack to be able to do anything. For 5, that's asking a little bit, but considering that this could win you the game at times, I'm going to play one of these and be alright with it, actually. Here's the way I look at it. This is good for Boros because later on, if you run into a board stall and you lose your momentum, it's one more push maybe, one more chance to win the game. +1/+0 and trample for your creatures, just push that damage across. Get past those board stalls. And you always, like I said earlier, are going to want a card that's going to help you push past those board stall situations. They happen quite frequently, especially in sealed. This will be good for that. It's also good outside of Boros. Think about Selesnya, they're going wide, they're going to have a lot of creatures. Case like that, yeah, giving everything +1/+0 and trample, if I'm splashing red into a Selesnya build for this, it might be worth it. Even Golgari, they're going a little taller, but the trample could be very relevant. So definitely, if you have the resources in your pool, consider this as a splash. It's not for every deck, obviously. If you're not really heavy on creatures, which it's limited, so a lot of the time you will be, but if you're not for some reason, maybe you're an Izzet or something, it might not be as good, obviously, but many times I think you play this. Sure Strike, another reprint here. This is an awesome combat trick. Giving a creature +3/+0 and first strike on the fly for just 2 is amazing. This can really get your opponent sometimes. It's a common. I mean, they should play around it, but they don't always remember to, and you can have a big moment if they don't. Also, another way to just keep pushing across damage. If you want to attack in with all your mentor creatures in Boros and you're afraid you might lose one due to a block, here's a way to, again, maybe get your opponent. They make that block that they almost have to make in that situation, and then you blow them out with a Sure Strike and just keep going. It's going to be great there, but just regardless, if you work this into your deck, it's a really fine combat trick no matter what you're doing. Torch Courier. This is great for an aggressive deck like the Boros strategy. It's a little creature. It's going to easily be pumped by Mentor. It has haste on its own. It only costs 1. It can do some early damage, and I like that a lot. And later on, when it can't get by anymore, you can sacrifice it to give one of the creatures you just played haste. maybe that new creature has Mentor, or maybe has another attack ability or something. You could really surprise your opponent from time to time. Perfect for the aggressive decks. But if I'm not all in on aggro, I'm going to skip this one and do something else. But if I am playing Boros, I'm going to be happy to pick this up, maybe even later in a draft pack, and it will be a playable. Alright, so let's move into the Izzet watermark cards now, beginning with Direct Current. You're going to see a lot of Jumpstart here, so we're going to start getting more into some of these Izzet strategies. Now, this card, at first you feel like, Shock does 2 damage to any target at instant speed. Why would I play this? Well, you're playing this for the Jumpstart. In Limited, doing 2 damage at sorcery speed, even for this casting cost, is actually still pretty good. Jumpstart and having the option to play it again out of your graveyard. Now, you do have to discard another card. Remember that, because it's not like you're getting this crazy card advantage or anything like that. I mean, you do have to turn another card into this, and sometimes that might not always be possible if what you have in your hand is better than this, or maybe you don't have cards in your hand for some reason. So it's not like this perfect, I'm always going to do 4 damage with. Don't look at these cards like that. But a lot of the times, over the course of the game, you're going to do 4 damage with it, especially when the game goes long and you don't need any more lands. You draw into your lands. Instead of that land being a dead draw, now it's going to do something, and that's the real appeal to Jumpstart, I think. And especially if you have creatures that get enhanced, even if it is just until end of turn with instants or sorceries, then, yeah, playing more of this type of thing actually could not only benefit you by the spell's ability itself, but also could lead to a profitable combat situation that turn. So yes, this is definitely playable in Limited, and Boros might actually even want to play it. It's going to be better in Izzet, though. Gravitic Punch. Alright, now this one can only hit opponent, and you have to have a creature with some power in play for it to matter, but it has Jumpstart, and I actually like this card. I don't want to play more than one. In a draft, don't prioritize it. You'll get this at the end of a pack very easily. Throw one of these in my Izzet deck, and it might do some work. Here's what I'm thinking. Izzet's got a lot of fancy spells. They got burn spells, they can fork things, but they don't have a ton of board presence, especially in a draft if you go all in on this strategy. So you might need to just push some damage across from time to time, and your opponent might have too many creatures for you to get by. Well, Izzet also has some of these creatures that get larger until end of turn when you play instants and sorceries. We'll see some of those coming up. If you play this, and maybe even play it twice in one turn if you have 8 mana and another card to discard, you could have a pretty large turn even if you can't get by in the air or on the ground, and I think that's worth running this card. What about outside of Izzet, though? Boros, maybe. Again, you don't want to dilute the aggressiveness of Boros. Not at all. But if you have a couple cards in your deck that enhance what Boros is doing, sometimes those aggressive decks do run out of gas towards the end of the game. If you're stuck and you can't push the last few points of damage across, this could do it for you. So maybe I play one there. But again, don't go overboard with things that take you off that game plan. Maximize Velocity. I like this one for Izzet mostly because it's cheap. 1 red and Jumpstart. So for 2 red and 2 cards, including this one, I can play 2 sorceries. That could actually matter from time to time depending on what my other cards are doing. Also, it gives the target creature +1/+1 and haste, so it kind of wants to be in an aggressive build. Again, don't dilute Boros. Be careful with what you're putting in there. But if you have room for one of these, it might be fine to enhance it just a little bit. Just don't go crazy. But sometimes this won't make your cut. You might have better things. But if you need some spells that you can fire off quickly, this is one of them. Risk Factor. I like this rare a lot. You won't see it all the time, but let's get the downside out of the way first. If you're behind, this isn't great. Let's say your opponent's just beating you down, maybe with that Boros aggressive build, or they're going wide with Selesnya and they're all over the place on the board and you're falling behind. They're at 18 life. You're at 8. You're about to lose the game. You draw this. You play it. Even if you can jumpstart it, they're going to take the 8 damage and beat you still, right? So it didn't save you. It's not great when you're behind because the opponent has the choice. You don't. However, in a close game, maybe a board stall situation, or maybe you're starting to put the pressure on the opponent and you need to tip the scales to move forward and maybe close out the game, this will be great because no decision's good. Taking 4 damage is a big chunk of your life total. If that happens twice, 8 damage is a big chunk of your life total. The other option is they let you draw 3 cards, then maybe another 3 cards. Yikes. Even if they mix that up, 4 damage and 3 cards, no matter how you mix that up, it leads to tons of advantage for you. If they do give you cards, you're in a great spot. As long as you don't just draw all lands or something, you should be able to start to close out a game just on card advantage. This is great. You're only paying 3 for it. It's an instant to boot, so you can hold it back to the right time. Fantastic card if you get a chance to play with it. Great in any build as well. Splashable too. I mean, Izzet would love this because it's an instant, sure, but any deck would be happy to run this if they can swing the casting cost. Alright, let's talk about some blue cards with the watermark. Chemister's Insight. This is a great card draw spell. You know, in your limited games, you need to have at least a little bit of card draw or some ways to move through your deck faster than your opponent. Sometimes in close games, especially sealed, it comes down to who sees more cards, so you want something like this. 4 mana instant speed, which is really nice at instant. Draw 2 cards and then you can jumpstart later and do it again. Phenomenal. If you can work one of these in your deck, you'll be happy. Again, being an instant, it's going to work with other things than Izzet, but it's still good in any deck that can afford to run it with the blue casting cost. Maximize Altitude. Well, here's another card that's similar to one we just saw. This time it's only 1 blue. Give something +1/+1 in flying, which I actually like better than haste because it does create a moment of evasion, even if it is just until end of turn, and then jumpstart so you can do it again. Or same turn, you could do it to 2 creatures. That could be really big at the right time. So yeah, it's cheap. It's going to interact well with your things that are looking for you to play instants or sorceries. Makes sense in Izzet, but it makes sense in a lot of builds as well that are just trying to push across damage, especially if you had some larger creatures. Maybe you're playing Golgari and you splash a little bit of blue in there, and those big tall creatures that are having trouble getting by, they can jump into the air for a moment and get some damage across. This is a pretty flexible card. Definitely don't underestimate this. Quasi-Duplicate. You know something? These type of spells are always good and limited. This one's a rare, you won't see it a lot. It only costs 3 to copy something. Now, it has to be a creature you control. Yeah, that's a little boring. I like when you can copy anything on the battlefield. But again, for 3 mana and jumpstart, sign me up. I'm going to play this if I have the opportunity. Double blue, not as easy to splash, obviously, but this is going to be great no matter what your strategy is. If you're in Dimir, which is a little more controlling, still you might be able to copy one of your win condition flyers or something like that. Izzet, again, is also a little more controlling, but there are creatures that are definitely worth copying there too. The tokens are more fragile than regular creatures and can be taken out with bounce effects, and this is not a good draw if you have no creatures, but I am not going to let that stop me. The potential upside here is just too good. Radical Idea. Alright, this is a smaller card draw spell. This isn't really about card advantage as much as it's just simply about moving through your deck quicker, and there's nothing wrong with that, as a matter of fact. That actually can be just fine for you. You play this for 2 at instant speed, draw a card, so you're just replacing this, but you're moving into the next card in your deck. Then later, maybe you discard a land or something that you don't need, you do this again, and you move another card deeper. So almost feels like a loot more than a draw, but that's just fine. For 2 mana, instant speed, I'll do this. I'll be pretty happy with it. And of course, being an instant, it will interact with other cards we're about to see. Okay, let's move into the gold cards for Izzet. And here's the first example of what I'm talking about. Beacon Bolt. Cost 3. It's going to deal damage to target creature, only creature, equal to the total number of instant and sorcery cards you own in exile and in your graveyard. So it does count things that you exiled with Jumpstart, which is why it's worded that way. And this has Jumpstart itself. This is a nice creature removal spell. Now, you want to make sure you have enough instants and sorceries in your deck for this to matter. Let's say you only have, 3 instants or sorceries. That's probably not good enough, because by the time you can actually do something with this, doing 2 damage to something isn't going to feel good enough. But if you're a little bit deeper into that game plan, which Izzet very well will be a lot of the time, then yeah, run this. It will be fine for you. Beam Splitter Mage. Yeah, it's a 2-drop 2/2, even though it is 2 different colors. Maybe sometimes it comes out on turn 3 instead of turn 2. And it's decent if you have enough spells that target creatures. So we just saw a couple of them. We saw the +1/+1 in haste. We saw the +1/+1 in flying. But this is actually pretty sweet because when you play it on this creature, you can copy it for free to another creature. That could actually be decent at times. Again, if you need the flying, especially maybe to push damage across. Combat tricks will work as well. So if you're in the middle of combat, you play an instant that's going to buff this, and it's also going to buff something else. This is a nice way for Izzet to still push across damage, even though they might not have the most solid board presence. This won't be great if this is your only creature, or if this and another creature don't have a good line of attack. So it is important to have good instants and sorceries to enhance your creatures to coincide with this, but it is still a decent curve filler in the event that that doesn't work out. Crackling Drake. I love this card. Now, color requirements are tighter. 2 blue, 2 red, so you're probably playing this in a more dedicated Izzet build. You're not splashing this anywhere, but it's a fine card. First off, even if this is 0/4 and you play it and it has flying and it replaces itself by letting you draw a card when it enters the battlefield, that's worth 4 mana right there. Slows things down, and as time goes on, the power will grow. Especially if you're in these colors, you would assume you're going to have a fair amount of instants and sorceries. Maybe you got some burn spells. If that's the case, well, wonderful, because then you're going to be able to maybe burn something in the air, keep the skies clear. This gets a little stronger power-wise. You attack in. Even if this thing quickly becomes a 2/4, that's pretty decent. Again, it also counts your spells that are in exile, so that's good for jumpstart. Fantastic uncommon here. This is one of those Izzet win conditions that you're going to want in your deck. Firemind's Research. In Limited, I do like this card. It's an enchantment that's doing nothing on its own. Not a big fan of that typically, but this only costs 2. The setup cost isn't that much. And then the counters are just going to flow if you're in these colors. You're going to play instants, you're going to play sorceries, counters will go on. Every once in a while, the red and 1 removing 5 counters to do 5 damage to any target will be very relevant. Again, it might be able to push across damage if you can't get damage across another way, so that's good. But I think more often than not, I see myself just simply drawing cards off this. And again, that card advantage could get me there too. So yeah, I like that there's versatility in the different abilities on it. It can be a little slow. That's not a deal breaker for me though. But if you don't have enough instants and sorceries in your builds, you might want to skip this one. Goblin Electromancer. Well, this is a reprint you're familiar with. Perfect for what Izzet is trying to do. And it is a 2/2 for 2, even if again, it is in 2 different colors. It's that common. You should be able to find these. But I do think if anyone's in this game plan, they're going to try to pick these up relatively high, maybe middle of the pack. So don't wait too long in a draft to grab them if you're in this color, just in case you're fighting with someone else. If you end up not having many instant or sorcery spells, this loses some value, but even getting the discount on the ones you have, and also the 2/2 body on the battlefield, feels just fine most of the time for what you're paying. Hypothesis. Alright, now this one's fine. It's a 5 casting cost instant. You get to draw 2 cards, so it replaces itself, and you go a card deeper. I like that economy. Then you may discard a non-land card. You don't have to, but you may. If you do, it deals 4 damage to target creature. So some of the time, it's also going to clear the path, which again, could be important for Izzet, especially in the sky, with the card we just saw, for example. And even if you don't do that, drawing a couple cards off this, not bad at all. Granted, it feels a little more economical for 5, maybe if you're burning a creature out. But in a pinch, if you're not, it's still good. Ionize. Alright, counterspell and 2 damage to that spell's controller. So, I mentioned again with Izzet, sometimes pushing that damage across might be a challenge. There's a few cards in here that try to give you at least a little bit of a push here or there. This is one of them. Now this is a rare. Again, you won't see it a lot, but a counterspell that's also dealing 2 damage. The 2 damage might not always be consequential. Sometimes, though, it will be. More importantly, countering a spell is always going to be good. For 3 mana, even if it is 2 different colors, I'm still on board. League Guildmage. Love these Guildmages. This one is especially good because it draws a card. My favorite words of Magic. Again, like the others, a 2/2 for 2, 2 different colors. It's a little slow. It doesn't do anything because it doesn't have haste, so you have to wait until your next turn to use these abilities. But once it's online, you're going to have a good time. That draw card is going to be extremely relevant, especially in a board stall. Things are slow and gummy. Just keep drawing cards every turn. You're going to pull ahead. It's just going to happen. To run an X to fork an instant or sorcery also could be very relevant at times, although I do think more often than not, you'll be drawing a card with this. This is a high draft pickup for me, especially if I know I'm already in these colors. It could be first pickable. And you know what? There's some packs I might first pick this anyway in pack 1. Even though it is a gold card, you don't want to lock yourself in too much at the beginning, but there is more flexibility when it comes to this particular environment, color fixing. And also, I think many times you're going to be in a 3-color build anyway. Niv Mizzet Perrin. Alright, the only problem with this card is the strict color requirement here. 3 blue, 3 red. If you can swing that, if you're all in on Izzet, guess what? You're going to play this and you're going to love it. 5/5, it can't be countered. It has flying. This is one of those win condition cards. Oh, and by the way, whenever you draw a card, it deals 1 damage to any target. Whenever a player, not just you, a player, casts an instant or sorcery spell, you draw a card. So you draw the card and, of course, you get to damage the target. Alright, that's crazy, especially with some card draw spells behind it. And even if that doesn't work out, you still got a 5/5 flyer. What's not to love here? I realize those color requirements are tight, but in the right deck, this thing is going to be a bomb. An amazing rare here. Rahl Izzet Viceroy. Alright, here's the Planeswalker. You know it's going to be good. It's mythic, you're not going to see this a whole lot. But if you get a Planeswalker in Limited, play the Planeswalker if you can, because it's going to be good for you. I don't really have to say too much more, but let's look at this one anyway. 5 casting cost, 5 loyalty. That's a good start, very substantial. Now that +1 ability is really good. Look at the top 2 cards of your library. 1 goes to your hand, 1 to the graveyard. You get card selection, and you could toss maybe a jumpstart spell in there, which almost feels like you're drawing 2 cards then, because you have that available to you. Now, Not exactly like drawing 2 cards because you do have to discard something, remember, but still, you have options there, and I do like that. -3, this is also pretty good, but you do have to have some instants and sorceries to fuel it, so that's a tad awkward, but it deals damage to target creature, only creature, equal to the total number of instants or sorcery cards that are either in exile or in your graveyard that you own. Okay, so hopefully, again, in Izzet, you have enough for that to matter, but that might be a tad awkward from time to time. The -8 is also a little situational, because if you don't have any more instants or sorceries for some reason, it's not doing anything, but the emblem's decent. It's not too far off, although I don't like to evaluate Planeswalkers on their ultimate because it is hard to get there. If you got there, though, and you had instants or sorceries, it will be great. So overall, play this for the +1. Maybe the -3 becomes relevant, but that +1 is going to be really good for you. The card selection and card draw you're getting from that is fantastic. If your opponent can't deal with this thing, they're in trouble. And if they did, they wasted resources to get rid of it, especially considering the 5 loyalty. It's not always going to be an easy task. As you would expect, amazing for sealed or draft. Sonic Assault, another card that's going to help you keep pushing across damage. Again, maybe your flyer needs to get by or something like that. This is going to tap target creature, but it also deals 2 damage to that creature's controller, so it's also giving a little bit of damage as well, which again, that might matter in Izzet. You might be scrapping for some damage here, especially if you don't have a ton of board presence. Also, it has Jumpstart yet again, so you get some more value there perhaps. And beyond that, you are using an instant maybe twice over the course of the game, which could be relevant with other cards too. Overall, another good Izzet card. Maybe you don't really use it outside of that game plan, but it'll be fine there, I think. 1,000-Year Storm. Alright, this is an interesting mythic. Basically, once you play this for 6, all your instants and sorceries have a storm-style effect to them. Not exactly like the mechanic Storm, but similar. Well, that's cool as long as you have enough instants or sorceries, right? And you can get here and play this. It's a little awkward because you're taking like turn 6 or 7 off to play this. That's not going to feel really good. You better have some good plays after that. If you do, wonderful. This will work well with Jumpstart, obviously. If you don't, though, if you don't have enough targets for this, skip it. It might be hard because you kind of want to do this. I want to do this. But there are times you might not have enough instants or sorceries to support this. If that's the case, you just got to let it go. We Dragonauts. Good reprint here, actually, for limited. This is another way that we're going to push across our damage. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, this gets +2/+0 till end of turn. Now, the toughness doesn't go up, but 3 toughness I think is substantial enough, especially in conjunction with some of the other spells you have here, because you have burn spells, you have ways to tap creatures, you have ways to just push damage across, like we saw that one card can just simply damage the opponent based on power. So there's ways to make the damage happen. This is an uncommon that you will definitely want in this particular build. This is one of those key win condition cards here. Piston Fist Cyclops. This one's a hybrid card. This one's not bad. 3 casting cost. I like hybrid mana. It does make things a little more flexible. 4/3 defender. It's going to gum up the ground really nicely, so that's fantastic, especially against more aggressive builds. And if you cast an instant or sorcery, at least for that turn, it can attack as if it did not have defender. So there are times that will be relevant. Maybe not all the time because 3 toughness is a little bit fragile. If you do attack in, it could trade a lot of the times, but it will trade up a good percentage of the time. There's nothing wrong with that, but I do think you want to keep this as a defender. Gum up the ground while you're trying to work out your Izzet plan. It's also a good Dimir control card because Dimir is trying to do the same thing, slow down the game a little bit. And if you don't main deck it for some reason, bring it in against an aggressive matchup. Expansion Explosion. I like this one a lot. It's a rare, you won't see a ton of it, but the first part is a real cheap way to fork a spell, as long as it costs 4 or less. But notice it's copy target instant or sorcery spell, not yours. So even if you don't have a ton in your deck for some reason, your opponent might have a few here or there, you might have a removal spell here or there. It's definitely worth running for just the 2 mana, especially again with hybrid mana, it makes it nice and flexible. You can even use this in a Dimir deck and feel really good about it because you know you're going to have some destroy spells in there. The explosion side you might not be able to cast in a Dimir deck, but that's okay because expansion just might be good enough some of the time. Let's talk explosion though for those Izzet decks. Not as forgiving. 2 blue, 2 red in X. Instant speed, deals X damage to any target. Target player draws X cards. So that can be 2 different targets. Don't feel like you have to give your opponent cards. That's not how it works. I can direct damage my opponent and I can draw the cards, or I can hit one of my opponent's creatures. I can still draw the cards. I can hit my opponent and make them draw the cards. Maybe I'm trying to mill them. I don't know. But anyway, you have that flexibility and it does give you a lot of options. There's nothing wrong with that. In some ways, and hear me out here, this feels a little bit like Sphinx's Revelation. Not as good. The life gain on Sphinx was key for control builds, and of course, casting cost wise, this is more difficult and larger, but it has that feel to it, at least for limited purposes. This will be great. The card draw alone is fantastic, not to mention the direct damage. And again, sometimes, especially if you're in Izzet colors, you may have trouble pushing across damage. This is a way to do it as well, and also stock your hand. It's kind of amazing. I would first pick this card actually in a pack, even though maybe I don't end up in Izzet, and then at least the explosion side of the card might go to waste, and then it's very possible if I can't play explosion that I might cut expansion when I'm building my deck, but it might be worth the risk. There's a lot of power here. Invert, invent. Alright, this is kind of funny because in case you don't know, invert, switch the power and toughness of each of up to 2 target creatures. Really nice combat trick. Notice it doesn't say until end of turn. Well, that was a mistake. So they have corrected it, even though it doesn't say it on the card. When you play the card, it is only until end of turn. So keep that in mind, especially the pre-release. That will cause confusion. But it's a good card to have. It's just 1 instant speed. Again, interacts well with other cards that are looking for you to play things like this. And also, it's a really nice combat trick. Sometimes, if you have a 0 power toughness creature across from you, it's even a removal spell. That could be cool. Lots of versatility. It can really trick your opponent, blow them out. I love it. And don't forget, it can target any creatures on the battlefield. Invent lets you tutor for an instant or sorcery card, relevant if you have them, obviously. And you should have enough. Even if you just have a few removal spells in your deck or something like that, it's worth searching one up in the moment you need it, right? Tutors are always good. This one costs 6. It does feel a little expensive, but it is an instant, so that's kind of nice. If you can't swing the colors and you're not splashing or are in Izzet, you're not playing this for the invert necessarily, I don't think. But if you can cast both of these with some consistency, it's a very runnable card. Alright, let's move on to the one artifact, the Izzet Locket. I won't spend a whole lot of time on this because we've been talking about lockets all week. Nothing's changed here. It's a good way to fix color, good way to ramp. I love the fact that you can sack it for 4 and replace it and draw another card. That's actually kind of awesome. Nothing wrong with this. It's great if you're trying to splash one of these colors as well. Izzet Guild Gates. Same story as we have seen all week, and you played with these before. You know what they do. They slow you down a little bit. I don't think that's a huge deal for Izzet colors, so I would go ahead and play this even if I'm just in Izzet for fixing consistency. But I would also consider this and be happier with it probably if I'm splashing one of these 2 colors in another build. And same with Steam Vents. There are some aggressive matchups where I might not want to shock myself. Izzet might be one of them. Boros definitely one of them. Consider that when you play this card. Other than that, though, great value here. At times, you just shock yourself and you don't have to worry about it slowing you down. Other times, you don't care if it slows you down. Great versatility to just keep everything smooth or splash one of these colors. Alright, with that being said, that is the Izzet portion of our set review. Guess what? That only leaves one more guild, Selesnya. So tomorrow, we're going to wrap things up with part 5, Selesnya, and then later in the week, we'll do our pre-release primer. We're also going to do a special market watch video talking about the value of some of these cards so you know what you're opening pre-release weekend. But until then, hey, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day. Hey, thanks for watching. This video is made possible by the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Check out the description below for links to our Patreon page as well as our Amazon affiliate store, where a small percentage of all sales will also help support the channel. Finally, if you haven't had a chance yet to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any new videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a great day.